I absolutely adore the Starfox games, and it's not even for the reasons that you may initially think. The on-rails space shooter is just fun to me, but I do think that there hasn't been a good Starfox game since the GameCube, and while I enjoyed Starlink, that does not count, and Star Fox Zero on the Wii U was on the Wii U, so it should be no surprise to anyone that I've been following this indie Starfox clone, X Zodiac. I do feel kinda bad for calling it a clone, as it does have a lot of its own elements going on here, but I'll say it outright, if you love any of these games, then this one will be right down your alley, and I can't put it any simpler than that. Right out of the gate, X Zodiac takes great effort to pay homage to the early 90s styles of games. Low poly models with pixelated effects and 16-bit music and sound effects. It's probably one of the most accurate looking games to try to emulate this look, and when you add a high frame rate and widescreen to that, it's actually a very nice modern take on the SNES era of gaming. And if the forced low resolution isn't your thing, this game does actually have a toggle option between retro low res and a high res version that still keeps the old school feel. Though I still personally prefer the low res, I think the high res one still keeps the art style consistent, along with making the visuals significantly crisper, so both are viable and look equally as nice. The game controls extremely well. It's fast and punchy, yet still very smooth and fluid, which is pretty important in a game like this. Currently, there are 3 different vehicles: the standard spacecraft, a hoverbike, and whatever this counts as. For both the jet and the bike on offense, you have a burst fire, charge shot, and bombs. And for the defensive side, you do have a barrel roll. Instead of a singular explosive shot, the charge instead locks onto multiple enemies, with the max amount of enemies you can lock onto increasing via level power-ups. However, I will say that due to the nature of this kind of game, it is basically unplayable without a controller, so I would recommend keeping that in mind. The levels themselves are short and sweet, plenty of enemies and environmental happenings to deal with. The set pieces for each level are quite nice and give you just something to look at and evade while blasting enemies. And if you see holes or natural arches, most of the time the game rewards you some kind of power-up for going through them, which I think is nice. Of the 6, my personal favorite is the 4th level, this desert planet, where half of the level takes place in this trippy pyramid with this Illuminati prism mini-boss. And I normally hate desert levels, so take that as you will. Of all the 6 levels available in this early access build, all of them are on rails, so there aren't any all-range mode ones, which I'm very take it or leave it on that. Star Fox 64 was the peak of level design for me, but I would avoid the non-railed sections, so I'm perfectly okay with them not being in here. Plus, the levels themselves are interesting enough to where I think just being on rails is about all it needs, since the flying is pretty much perfected here. As expected, every level ends with a boss, and I would say that the bosses are certainly the high point in most levels. Each have a short cutscene and are all uniquely designed with equally unique attacks, making them very interesting to fight with a good amount of challenge. None take too terribly long to take down with the laser upgrade, and your bombs, when used correctly, can actually be pretty satisfying to use as they tear through their health. One bit of boss design that stuck out to me was how the barrel roll interacts with the boss's movesets, as there are bosses that do big sweeping attacks that require the use of it to not take any damage, and I give my hat off to the devs for this. I thought that this was an extremely clever way to include the player's moveset and designed around their abilities. Of the 12 available bosses, including the ones in the secret levels, I can't say I have a favorite, as all of them are incredibly fun to fight, except for the 3rd level boss, this Asteroid Crusher. While being one of the more uniquely designed bosses in the game, it is kind of annoying to fight, and if you only have a single laser, then it can drag on for some time, and I would recommend just restarting the level as a whole. Throughout each level, you can collect a data chip, and when a level is completed, you enter cyberspace, which is a secret level. Now, these specific segments of the game are heavily inspired by the game Space Harrier, which is not a game that I've played, so this new set of everything isn't particularly my jam, but I still thought that they were fun to go through, and it does house this set of masks boss, which I particularly enjoyed, getting some of the OG Andross vibes. I'm not particularly sure what makes the data chips appear though. I think it's tied to how many kills you've gotten, but I'm not 100% sure. Every level ends with a scorecard and a ranking. Going for all S ranks in all levels is pretty fun, so I have no complaints there, especially considering the fact that all the levels are pretty damn challenging for what they are. The two characters we meet, the pilot and the engineer, are here, they exist. I can't really say too much on them as there really isn't a story in this game yet, and half the time they speak, it's in the middle of firefights. And Starfox gets a pass here specifically because it's voiced, and you don't need to take your eyes off of anything to know what they're actually talking about. Off time and level transitions and cutscenes are the only times where you can safely read any dialogue, and even going back and reading what they were saying from my footage, the characters are all pretty milquetoast at best, but I don't really care. As to me, that's not really the point of this game, and I'm sure that once the game is actually finished, a lot more will be added to the story, but for now, it's pretty much all focused on the gameplay. The full game is planned to have branching paths, which aren't shown here in the early access, so I can't really say if he means branching paths as in just different levels and different orders, or if the individual levels are going to be having multiple ways to go about them. I think both would be interesting in their own right, so I'm excited to see where it goes. I enjoyed this game immensely, but I do want to address the early access part of this. There are only 6 levels available, and because all of them are relatively short, you're not going to get all too much playtime out of this in its current state. On one hand, I do think that devs should definitely take advantage of early access when they can. However, I do think that just because of the minuscule amount of content that's actually here right now, it might rub some players off the wrong way. But if you've had any fleeting interest in any of the Starfox game, then I would certainly recommend giving this game a try. And I myself is certainly going to be keeping up with it to see how it goes. But thank you all so much for watching. If you liked the video, then like it. If you'd like to see more, then press that subscribe button, and I will see you all on the next video.